Hello, Vermonters, and welcome to a series that I'm creating for us all to discuss the issues that face us together, particularly fiscal issues. So that's why the theme here you will see is the tick belly sucking the life out of the bloated dome in Montpelier. And the squeeze bottle is how we get it to pull its head out and stop destroying us fiscally. And so what I'd like to discuss right now is just sort of a general backdrop of the idea that government has grown too big, that even if it's well-intentioned, government always generally grows too big, as in serving its so-called purposes, it starts to just literally become more unwieldy than we can afford. And that's true with pensions and a lot of other areas. And what we've seen in recent years is the government in Vermont is pushing more and more in ways that are regressive to take money from the poor to pay for stuff for rich people in the name of helping the poor. And this is happening in a lot of ways. This is classic regressive taxation. It is not progressive taxation. They even were proposing to put sales taxes on food this year. So this will be a series where we discuss this. And today I'd like to just discuss one of the things we're facing, which is historically has been called theoretically the tragedy of the commons. And the history of this is interesting. It's biblical through Judaic history, but also here in New England. A lot of the common areas here in Vermont, particularly like Chelsea, areas where, I don't know its exact history, but a lot of these early colonial towns would have a common area where they would share grazing for beef or sheep or other animals. And the temptation was to put more animals in than your normal share, even though that might deplete that common area more and more. So what we have now is government has sort of intervened to take over the commons. And in the name of protecting us from individual excesses, it has become a bigger devourer of those common assets and resources than we individuals ever were. The real solution to these problems is in local, not big corporate or government solutions. And now we see more and more government solutions. They're going to solve global warming. They're going to help all the poor people. They're going to end racism. They're going to use social and emotional learning for children and all these things when government can't even balance its budget. And so if there's any area to look where there's a tragedy of the commons, it is in our current monetary situation nationally, gas prices, other inflationary prices. So people have asked me as I'm running for state senate, well, what would you do about gas prices? And I say pretty quickly, well, I'm not really going to do much in the Vermont State Senate about gas prices. But I can talk about why gas prices are high nationally and globally, and why Vermonters should fashion certain policies that will intercept this inflation, which is going to continue to arise. And a really great resource for this issue of inflation is Thomas Friedman, who I've studied for years, who's an economist. Many of you know of him, and I'm going to share a quote from him. But what he says is that inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. And so what we see is President Biden blaming various different things for inflation. First, it was going to be transitory. Donald Trump has been blamed. COVID has been blamed, whereas COVID was actually an excuse to print a huge amount of money that was distributed in a very sloppy and frivolous way. Used cars have been blamed. Gouging oil companies have been blamed. Ukraine and Putin have been blamed. But what we'll see is the real cause has been the printing of money because, as Milton Friedman says, and correctly, inflation is everywhere and always a monetary problem. And this has impacts or a lot of real reasons why Vermonters should be preparing to resist the inflation that's coming, to have more food, more local food. There are a lot of things on my website and otherwise that I'll be talking about and writing about how to react to those things that we can do on a local level when we have national inflation. So the temptation of printing money by Joe Biden and others is pretty obvious when you can get away without being responsible for it. And what Thomas Friedman wrote in his book, Money Mischief, it's about history and different episodes in history when countries have abused their currencies. And this is what he wrote. He said, perhaps the single most important and most thoroughly documented yet obstinately rejected proposition is that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. That proposition has been known by some scholars and men of affairs for hundreds, if not thousands of years, yet it has not prevented governmental authorities from yielding to the temptation to mulct their subjects by debasing their money, taxation without representation, while vigorously denying they are doing anything of the kind and attributing the resulting inflation to all sorts of other devils incarnate. Rapid increases in the quantity of money produce inflation. That's pages 262 and 263. So we hear the government blaming it on all kinds of other devils incarnate. But the devil that's become incarnate here in Vermont and elsewhere is food inflation. And that's going to be layered throughout, particularly foods that are sensitive to fuel prices. And when we have a large amount of our food is shipped here from foreign nations or California, and we have escalating costs of distribution in addition to all the costs of production and harvesting, it's going to get worse. And it makes a lot of sense to start helping our local farmers, which is the number one thing we can do. But there are many other ideas we'll be putting forward. But to understand what's happening, you have to understand money supply. And that's what our legislature doesn't seem to understand. And they're printing money. Well, they're not printing money. They're spending money in ways that are profligate. Universal meals sound great, except they're extraordinarily regressive. Why would we give money or food to people who have $1 million houses and earn $2 million a year in the name of we're going to feed all children? That's not what we've ever done because it's regressive. All right, and it takes money for the poor to give to the rich. So these are the kinds of things we're going to discuss as we try to expose the bloat at the Golden Dome. I'm going to be here to connect the dots. My name is John Clark. I want to go into the Senate so I can connect the dots for all of our senators and all of our House members and have another voice that brings some fiscal insight and awareness to this debate. It really seems to be missing. And things are going to get worse, I'm afraid to say, but that's why we need to come together on the things we can do. And that's why I ask you to vote for me, a Republican, John Clark, for Orange County Senate. My name is John Clark, and I approve of this message. Thanks very much for listening.